there are two things that struck to me in your response. One is the fact that certainly there is this tradition of idealism, even in someone like Kant, from what I can understand.
Yes,
But
yes,
it
true.
only extends from the Bhutakash to the Chittakash. This tradition of pantheism or panentheism that you talked about in, let's say, Ramanuja or Shankara, where you
Yeah.
have the Chidakash, where even the our mental frame of a thought is subsumed into a broader milieu or background of consciousness. I don't think there were that many equivalents to this concept in the Western framework. Have there been?
That's difficult because they inherited the very traditional Christian view of God
Hmm.
as apart from the universe. They, on the whole, stuck with that. So, for Kant, you rightly say he was an idealist, he was. Um, but he did also say we know nothing about that other world of things in themselves. We don't know anything about it, which is a very strange thing for him to say. Uh, but he didn't believe in any sort of experience of the transcendent. He didn't believe in that. So, although he thought there was a transcendent, he even called it the noumenal world, which from the Greek is the mind-like world. He even called it that. But he still refused to say we had any knowledge because he also believed that all knowledge must be of physical realities. So I think that's a very paradoxical position to hold. And but he did hold it. So he was an idealist. He thought there was a transcendent world, but we know nothing about it. And my comment to that is, if you know nothing about it, you know nothing about it, how do you know it's there?
Hmm.
But so, yep, there's that tension in the Western tradition, I think, that's there, of an external God of whom we don't have experience because all our experience is of this finite world. But really, as an idealist, you should have known that our experience is where all knowledge begins with. And our experience, the consciousness of reality, is not itself physical. It may have a physical cause, or it may not, but it is not physical. That's the absolute hub. Uh, it's the question that people in Britain answer by saying only the physical is real at all. People like me want to say, why should you think that? How would you know that? Aren't there millions of people who are not mad who think there is experience of the non-physical? Even if you know somebody's mind telepathically, and I think you can, uh, even that will be denied as just a story, a myth, a legend. So, yeah.
I just have one question before we take the final question from the chat box. There haven't been any other questions in the chat box. I found it very interesting that you mentioned that, let's say, with the advent of technology, we may potentially, and we already have to some extent, come up with conscious forms of technology, for instance, LLMs or the chatbots or artificial intelligence that is used. At the same time, I came across this argument by John Searle, the
Yep,
Chinese room argument. And
yep,
it really, what I think about artificial intelligence is that we certainly do know that we can give in an input and get an output. But we don't know that subjective experience of what it is like to receive that input. Like when we are having this conversation, there is something so subjective and deeply personal about it, which can't be reduced to, let's say, me processing words that you say, and vice versa. There is this emotional or there is this personal aspect to it as well. But that is something, the emotional aspect aside, we don't even know for sure whether computer programs can really understand, as opposed to following a set of rules. Ki if you get this input, this is the corresponding output. Do you think this problem is, let's say, yet another reason to be a bit humble when it comes to, let's say, knowing the nature of mind or positing materialist causes for the entire universe or for ourselves?
Yes, I think you're exactly right. And John Searle, as I'm sure you know, is a materialist. But he does, in the Chinese box example, for instance, he does say that thoughts and feelings are something that a computer could never have. So he holds both of those views because he holds that thought, although computers could never have thoughts and feelings, those things, thoughts and feelings, are produced by purely physical processes. So the physical, although there are both sorts of things, physical and conscious thoughts and feelings, and they're different, nevertheless, the consciousness could not exist without the physical, and it's caused by the physical. So that's why he's really a materialist, because he thinks consciousness exists, but it's caused by and could not exist without the physical. Whereas a believer in God would have to say, actually, the physical is caused by the conscious, by God. And so they may look alike. It may look as though John Searle is saying, oh, no, I admit there is consciousness, but then he's denying that it has causal efficacy. He does not think that mental events ever cause physical events, but of course they do. My mental events make my own go, but he would deny that. So he's halfway there, Churchill. But he calls himself sometimes a monist. There's only one sort of reality, but he actually is not a monist. He thinks that consciousness and physical reality are different, but the consciousness depends wholly on the physical. And of course, he's not then an idealist after all, but he ought to be.
Okay, just as a final aside before the final question, because this just struck to me. How do you evaluate Professor Daniel Dennett's, let's
Yes.
say, conception of consciousness? Because he always seemed to me like one of the milder and more open-minded of the new atheists, as
Yes,
opposed to some of the
yes.
others.
I know him very well too. He's a delightful person. But his view is really, I think, absolutely untenable. And that is that consciousness doesn't really exist at all. One of his most famous remarks is that in the future, we will no longer say, I have a pain in my head. We will say, oh, neuron 456 is now firing in my brain. I can't even begin to imagine that happening. So he just says consciousness is a physical thing. It's not really there at all. My own philosophy tutor, Gilbert Ryle, said this long ago, and he said, actually, you don't have mental images. Like, for example, you close your eyes and you think of being in Delhi, or, and you think of Delhi and you see it, and you remember a building there and you see it. I can see that building. And Gilbert Ryle said, no, you can't. You just think you can. And I would say to him, but I'm seeing it. There it is. And he said, no, no, you're not. You just think. And I said, I had a dream last night and all sorts of things happened and I can tell you what they were. And he said, no, you just woke up and thought you had a dream. So what do you do with a person like that? And Daniel Dowden says the same thing. You just thought you had a pain. My goodness, it hurts. It actually hurts. It's real. So I just think that's he's a very, very good philosopher and knows a lot about science, but he's just totally wrong. There are things I experience that he says don't exist.
This really reminds me of one of the late Sir Roger Scruton's work, The Soul of the World, where he
Obvious.
pointed out that it's how ridiculous it is to, let's say, analyze the Mona Lisa through the optical properties of certain pigments,
Yes,
rather than the sense of awe that it inspires in us. I
that's
think that
right.
is really one of the dangers of scientism.